Hey guys, alright? Welcome everyone. The story begins with a woman fleeing from something in the jungle. When she feels she is at a safe distance from the enemy, she retraces her steps to throw off the pursuer before hiding. The creature that arrives next moves very quickly, has long claws, and emits strange bubbling sounds. The girl realizes her trick didn't work and decides to run, but the thing catches up to her in no time and grabs her head. Then we meet Sergeant Darren McCall, who has just arrived in South America with archaeologist Lynn and anthropologist Felicia. The expedition was commissioned by magnate Henry Vargas, with the goal of finding a famous dagger that belonged to Pedro Alvarado, a legendary Spanish conqueror. The operation is being coordinated by Vargas's assistant, Carla, and the local guide who will assist the trio is Santiago. After discreetly facilitating their entry with a bribe, Santiago also deals with another kind of barrier. General Gomez's men have closed the road. Santiago resolves the situation with a box full of beers, and the group is soon granted passage. Darren hands the others some wristwatches provided by Carla that contain a device allowing them to be tracked in real time. He laughs at Lynn for studying the map of the area known as the Jungle of the Dead and says that isn't how you look for hidden treasure. Felicia reminds him this is a map that not everyone has, since that part of the jungle has yet to be explored. While Lynn doesn't hide his financial motivation for working for Vargas, Felicia shows more interest in her studies of the ancient inhabitants, the Umbali tribe. Meanwhile, at the company's provisional base, a strange noise catches the attention of one of the employees. He begins to push aside the foliage from the bushes to discover what is moving behind them, and nobody realizes when something attacks him. Darren and Santiago clear a path for the two scientists and an assistant, Juan. Suddenly, the sergeant tells everyone to get down and analyzes the tracks on the ground, fearing more guerrillas might be around. He warns that it was just a false alarm, and Felicia laughs at his exaggerated performance. Soon after, Lynn stumbles upon a skull of a Spanish conquistador and estimates that it must have been there for over 500 years. Only then does Santiago translate the name of that place to the Americans, explaining that it is called the Jungle of the Dead because it is cursed. Felicia recounts that many conquerors who ventured there never returned. More concerned about contemporary violence, Darren calls Carla asking about the rebellion, and she says there have been no reports of incidents near them. Shortly after, Carla sends a picture of the skeleton to Henry Vargas and mentions Darren's concern about the guerrillas. Vargas says he paid General Gomez for a 48-hour truce, but Carla warns that Gomez is not the kind of person who honors all his agreements. At the same time, Lynn celebrates their arrival at the cemetery they were looking for. The graves are all facing east, but the one they seek should be positioned differently. Santiago grows apprehensive upon hearing all this, as he didn't know the task involved robbing graves. Lynn laughs at his superstition and, as soon as he finds the tomb facing south, doesn't allow Felicia to read the inscriptions on the lid, reminding everyone that Vargas will only pay them if they return with what they promised. Darren asks that they open the lid quickly, and to everyone's delight, the dagger is right there, embedded in what was once someone's chest. Felicia finds it very strange that a European invader was buried with such care by the natives and begins to read the inscriptions inside, in case there is any sort of curse. Still mocking her, Lynn pulls out the dagger and shows that nothing happened. She becomes furious, saying one of those symbols means death. No one pays much attention to her, and Darren tells Carla that the mission was accomplished. Lynn is even happier when he discovers a ruby embedded in the dagger's hilt. With less fear of the dead now, Santiago asks Felicia how much that stone might be worth. However, Carla anticipates this kind of complication and asks Darren to keep the dagger with him. It is then that everyone hears a series of booming sounds, and the ground begins to tremble. Carla asks what is happening, frightened by the noise and screams. We see some roots emerging from the open tomb without anyone noticing. Darren commands everyone to hurry and get out of there, but Lynn steps into a trap. He is quickly lifted into the air, upside down. Darren asks the others to help free him, but the group is being surrounded by a stealthy threat. They can only notice the movement around them and catch a glimpse of a pair of claws. When the creature approaches, Juan pushes Felicia to protect her, being immediately attacked. She runs away, and Darren tries to shoot the attacker but cannot keep his aim and decides to go after it. Santiago panics at finding himself practically alone, and Lynn won't stop screaming, begging someone to free him. Carla's call interrupts the chief's nap, and he becomes irritated upon hearing that the group was attacked. She says General Gomez swears it wasn't him and also informs him that she has lost the tracker signal. As soon as Vargas sees the image of the ruby, he becomes convinced that no attack occurred, thinking someone from the expedition must have stolen the dagger. Despite Carla's protests, he decides to go there personally and fix the damage caused by his incompetence. In the jungle, Darren is searching for Felicia when Santiago catches up with him, pleading that he calls Carla and asks for a rescue. The sergeant becomes furious upon seeing that he left Lynn hanging there in the cemetery and says no one will be rescued until the group reunites. Santiago tries to forcefully take the phone, but Darren easily subjugates him. Then he says he isn't going back to the cemetery alone, forcing the sergeant to choose between his two friends. The situation is looking grim for Lynn, who is still upside down when he senses something approaching stealthily. He suddenly collapses and sees someone coming close to him with unfriendly intentions. At the camp, Carla is determined to get results before her boss arrives. She speaks to the person in charge and asks him to assemble a search team. He says that the natives have been very frightened since one of them disappeared, and even more so now with rumors of the attack. In the jungle, Santiago makes more late revelations about the area, telling that there are several legends among the natives about something they call the shadows that speak with the trees. They are cruel creatures that look like people but walk like animals. Darren merely responds that he doesn't believe in fairy tales. Upon hearing a twig snap, the two become alert, and Darren steps away from Santiago again. Terrified, he leans against one of the trees without knowing that the crackling is coming from that very trunk. A hole opens right behind him, as if it were the tree's eye, and one of the branches grabs his arm. He lets out a scream of terror, but the phenomenon ceases when Darren returns, laughing at his mysticism. In another part of the forest, Felicia accidentally trips and has a terrifying encounter with a masked man. To her astonishment, he is attacked by vines and roots that then drag his body away. A second masked figure appears and is about to attack her when Darren arrives shooting. Santiago removes the mask from the subdued enemy and says these are not the shadows but members of the Yambali tribe. At the same time, Lynn is being taken away as a prisoner. Screaming, he says he is American, and it will cost the tribe dearly. Felicia tries to explain what she saw in the forest, saying it is something terrifying even for the Yambali. An account of ancient inscriptions from the tribe stated that the jungle feeds on the blood of invaders. Darren doesn't believe any of this, especially after seeing that they are just people in costumes. When Vargas arrives at the base, we discover that Carla is not just worried about her job. She knows the jungle is dangerous and fears that Vargas will be in danger going there. As he's very stubborn and obsessed with the dagger, she only asks him to take the watch with the tracker. Lynn is dumped next to the same woman who was fleeing from something in the forest. Her name is Emma, and she is in terrible shape. As Lynn begins to explain about his expedition, she immediately guesses that he came to retrieve the dagger on Henry Vargas's orders. Emma knows this because it's exactly what happened to her 2 weeks ago. To make matters worse, she reveals that she is the sole survivor of the expedition. Back at the cemetery, Darren finds Lynn's glasses and concludes he has been taken. Not knowing how many Yambali there are, he decides to seek help at the camp instead of rescuing him. While Vargas makes his way through the forest, Lynn witnesses a gruesome ritual. Emma is tied to a totem, and the tribe's shaman chants a series of mantras while walking in her direction. Lynn starts screaming in fury, telling him not to hurt her. But then he realizes that all the Yambali are leaving without laying a finger on her. Soon after, the vines start appearing behind the totem, and he understands that the ritual is a kind of sacrifice. Emma is being offered to the forest, and soon her whole body is wrapped like a cocoon. Not far away, Vargas finds signs that the natives are nearby. One of his men is struck by a spear, and several Yambali emerge from their hiding places simultaneously. An ally is severely injured, and Vargas kills the enemy. One of the soldiers is a man named Bernie, who rushes to save the wounded comrade and is shocked when Vargas ends his suffering in a drastic way. He tells Bernie that the lad wouldn't survive the journey back and that he mustn't let his emotions interfere with the mission. Still making his way back to the area where there is signal, Darren finds a bloodstained shirt caught in a tree but says it doesn't belong to Lynn. Vargas orders Carla to dismantle the camp and refuses to halt the expedition, increasingly deluded by the adventure. However, she doesn't even have time to relay the order as the base is already being attacked by the Yambali. One of them starts dragging her by the feet and is quickly shot down by the chief. He helps her, but ends up hit by a spear, and Carla loses consciousness after taking a punch. Sometime later, Darren arrives at the ruins of the camp with Felicia and Santiago. Besides the signs of tragedy all around, another piece of bad news is that the boats have been destroyed. Carla wakes up in the middle of the jungle, being carried by one of the Yambali. She begins to scream and thrash about until the forest shakes with one of those booms again. The Indian drops Carla to the ground, and everyone goes on high alert. When one of them is pierced by a branch, the rest decide to flee, but still take Carla with them. At the camp, Felicia finds Vargas's suitcase and discovers that there was another expedition before this one. This explains the shirt Darren found, and they deduce that none of this was mentioned because the first team must have met a bad fate. Carla is taken to the same place where Lynn is. Outraged, he begins to question her about the previous expedition and shows that Emma's hands are still tied to the totem. However, Carla swears she knows nothing about it, and Lynn suspects that Vargas may have even deceived her. Vargas arrives at the cemetery and becomes excited to find Pedro's tomb, convinced that he is his ancestor. Already losing patience with him, Bernie takes a while to realize when one of the vines attacks him and starts to choke him. By blasting the tree, he manages to force it to release its victim and saves the boss's life. This doesn't end well for him, as the tree captures him again right after, and Vargas just runs away, doing nothing to help him. Darren manages to activate the tracker, discovering Lynn and Vargas's whereabouts. He hands the dagger to Santiago and says he will return to the jungle, as he cannot leave Lynn behind. Felicia insists on going with him, and Santiago doesn't want to stay there alone. Meanwhile, an Indian is preparing Lynn for the ritual. Knowing what it's for, he devises an escape plan and asks Carla for help. When two Yambali appear to take him to the totem, he pushes one of them onto her, who discreetly grabs her knife to cut the bonds. The ritual takes place again, and the vines begin to wrap around Lynn. Carla is still far from freeing herself when the cocoon forms and she turns her face away not to see the horrible scene. It doesn't take long until it is her turn. When the Indian begins to paint her face, she tries to appeal to the woman's kindness and finally manages to cut the rope. The Indian appears confused and takes a while to raise the alarm, but ends up shouting, and Carla runs away. Darren, Felicia, and Santiago are still walking toward the totem, as it was the last place the locator for Lynn appeared. Santiago keeps saying that the jungle is cursed, and Darren notes that nothing strange happened before they removed the dagger from its place. Curious, Felicia asks to analyze the weapon up close. She says the hilt is of Spanish origin, but the blade was replaced at some point. When she tries to break the hilt to read what's written underneath, Santiago prevents her from ruining the only advantage they might have in a negotiation with Vargas if they need a rescue. Then Darren sees on the tracker that someone is moving quickly. He still doesn't know Carla is in the jungle too. Vargas has just found her and says the forest is alive. His face is covered in dirt, and he looks more maniacal than ever. Carla realizes he always knew something was wrong there and didn't hesitate to risk many lives anyway. Furious, she starts to run away from him, and Darren finds them just then, telling Vargas to drop the weapon. He surrenders but doesn't let them use his phone until he gets the dagger. Darren says nothing stops him from pulling the trigger and just grabbing the phone afterward, but Vargas is overtaken by heroic fury and dares the sergeant to go ahead. The duel is interrupted by the plants behind Vargas, which begin to rise together. A horrible plant monster starts to take shape while the vines whip the weapons away from human hands. To save himself, Vargas pushes Carla toward the thing, and Darren's shots don't manage to prevent the branches from closing in on her, muffling her screams. They all start running away from that abomination, but Vargas cannot escape and is lassoed to the monster. Santiago sees that Darren is about to be attacked by one of the roots and pushes him away. He ends up hit in the leg, and Darren returns the favor by cutting the root. To escape the murderous trees, the three jump into a stream and then take shelter in a cave, where Felicia treats Santiago's leg. Darren builds a fire and begins to plan the counterattack, stating that it is better to face the threat than to keep trying to flee. However, Santiago is in very bad shape, and Felicia says they need the medical kit that is in the camp. On the way there, a tree branch suddenly snatches the torch from Darren's hand. Soon after, Santiago is pulled away, and Felicia runs to save him, losing her own torch in the process. As it begins to flicker out, the three huddle in the darkness, trembling with fear. Noticing some movement, Darren tells them to be silent. Soon several points of light begin to appear, and the forest is illuminated by the Yambali's torches. After one of them takes the dagger from Darren, the trio is captured and taken to the totem. Felicia panics upon seeing Lynn's wristwatch, but Darren urges her to keep it together and hold back her scream for everyone's sake. When the shaman begins to poke Santiago's leg, she tries to communicate with him in a Mayan dialect, and Darren says the man seems to understand. The shaman shows the dagger and explains that they shouldn't have messed with it. When the European conquerors arrived, the tribe invoked the protective spirit but could not control it afterward. Hence, they created a talisman made with a Yambali blade and the Spanish hilt, to prevent the entity from continuing to spread chaos. Darren asks if that means he will have to face the tree monster with the dagger, but the shaman says no. The dagger must be embedded in sacred ground. Opening Santiago's shirt, he states that it is possible to exchange one heart for another. Clarifying further, Felicia says Santiago has a chance if the protector is defeated. Darren accepts the challenge, and they take Santiago to the tomb facing south. Pushing the lid open completely, Felicia and Darren are startled to see a beating heart. When Darren plunges the dagger into it, Santiago begins to scream, and the earth trembles. Felicia thinks it was a bad idea, and Darren then removes the dagger, but that only makes things worse. A vine pierces Santiago's chest, and the tree monster reappears. They all run away, and Darren breaks the dagger for Felicia to read what's inscribed on the blade. Searching for a clue, she discovers that the true mantra is one heart for all hearts. Pedro Alvarado was sacrificed to save the tribe, and that is what the shaman expected to do with Santiago. When the Yambali return, Darren begins to fight one of them, and Felicia has to flee from another. The sergeant wins the fight and drags the unconscious Indian to the cemetery, apologizing to him before preparing the dagger for the sacrifice. But then the other Indian prevents him from proceeding, showing that Felicia is his hostage. Moreover, she herself asserts that the sacrifice has to be a foreigner for it to work. The defeated Yambali begins to regain consciousness, and Darren extends the dagger to him, offering his own life in exchange for the end of the curse. At that moment, the Indian is suddenly shot, and we see that the shooter is Vargas. He somehow escaped from the tree monster's grasp and still wants his dagger at all costs. Darren refuses to hand it over and ends up hit in the shoulder, but he confronts Vargas when he approaches. The two begin to exchange blows, and even Felicia joins the fight, not realizing that the Indian let her go because he sensed the danger. The tree monster is back and grabs Felicia by the feet, capturing the Indian right after. Not even this makes Vargas stop attacking Darren. However, the sergeant manages to turn the tables and throws him into the open tomb, creating the perfect opportunity for the sacrifice of a foreigner. However, his raised arm is snagged by one of the vines before he can plunge the dagger. Gathering all his strength, Darren wins the arm wrestling match with the monster and buries the dagger right in the proper place. The earth trembles, the roots return below the soil, and the tree monster begins to destabilize until it becomes completely still, releasing its two captives. The Indian throws his spear to the ground and extends his hand to Darren, making a friendly gesture for the first time. Felicia cries in relief, and Darren tells her that the nightmare is over.